I call this hearing to order. I want to thank everyone for joining us.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, are we ready? Good afternoon. I call this hearing to order. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon for our committee's first official remote hearing. I want to make sure to note some important requirements. House regulations require members to be visible through a video connection throughout the proceeding. So please keep your cameras on. Also, if you have to participate in another proceeding, please exit this one and log back in later. And remember to remain muted until you are recognized to minimize background noise. Over the last few months, the outbreak of COVID-19 has led to an unprecedented public health crisis and a dire economic crisis. We have lost over 110,000 people to the disease and 40 million remain unemployed. Back in February, as the pandemic was getting worse, we knew we needed to take action to help our small businesses survive the economic downturn. We started working with the SBA and governors around the country to leverage what's going on? Okay, now can you hear me?
We hear you. Yes.
So let's start this all over again.
We hear you, Madam Chair.
Well, good afternoon. I call this hearing to order. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon for our committee's first official remote hearing. I want to make sure to note some important requirements. House regulations require members to be visible through a video connection throughout the proceeding. So please keep your cameras on. Also, if you have to participate in another proceeding, please exit this one and log up back in later. And remember to remain muted until you are recognized to minimize background noise. Over the last few months, the outbreak of COVID-19 has led to an unprecedented public health crisis and a dire economic crisis. We have lost over 110,000 people to the disease and 40 million remain unemployed. Back in February, as the pandemic was getting worse, we knew we needed to take action to help our small businesses survive the economic downturn. We started working with the SBA and governors around the country to leverage the SBA's disaster resources available through the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, also known as EIDL. Can you please mute? Everyone should be muted. As the virus continued to spread, more state and local governments began imposing stay-at-home orders and business closures. We quickly realized Congress needed to do more to meet the full scope of the problem, and that is when we started working on what ultimately became the CARES Act. To help small businesses and eligible nonprofits, Congress created the new Paycheck Protection Program, expanded eligibility to the EIDL program, and provided payment and interest relief for current SBA borrowers. I worked tirelessly to secure $10 billion in funding to create a new EIDL emergency grant program, which was designed to get money into the hands of struggling small businesses swiftly. Borrowers could request a loan advance of up to $10,000 within 3 days of applying that needs not to be repaid even if the applicant was eventually denied the EIDL. And due to the unprecedented demand for the program, Congress infused another $10 billion into the emergency grant program and an additional $50 billion in the loan program as part of the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act. Congress also increased SBA funding for salaries and expenses to hire staff, upgrade technology, and ultimately respond to demand in a timely, efficient fashion. Despite these steps, and more than 3 months after Congress first enacted legislation to provide economic relief to small businesses, borrowers are still reporting significant challenges with EIDL grants and loans. For example, EIDL loans are supposed to have a maximum loan size of $2 million. We learned that SBA imposed a maximum loan size of $150,000, shortchanging millions of small businesses. Unfortunately, we also learned that SBA is limiting the crucial grants to $1,000 per employee. And some are not even receiving the grant at all, which is simply unacceptable. This is blunting the positive impact this program could have for small businesses that need help the most. We have also heard that the SBA has not communicated effectively with applicants, nor has it provided them with reliable methods to check the status of their application. Applicants need to know where they stand in the queue to approximate how much longer they can expect to wait to receive financing. And given the current economic climate, if they are going to be denied, they deserve timely action so that they can explore options for capital elsewhere. These are just some of the reports the committee has received with the SBA administration of the EIDL program in the COVID-19 era. As the committee undertakes its oversight duties, we want to begin by hearing directly from small businesses who have applied for the program so that we can understand the successes and challenges they have experienced. However, in order to fully perform our work, we also need to hear from the Small Business Administration. Without their appearance and testimony before this committee, it will be difficult to make additional changes to the agency's programs. Earlier today, Administrator Carranza testified before the Senate Small Business Committee, and it is my hope that she will testify before us soon as well. With that, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about their perspective on how Congress can keep working to improve the EIDL program and where we should focus our oversight efforts. I now yield to the ranking member, Mr. Chabot, for his opening statement.
That's wrong. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for holding this important hearing relative to the SBA's EIDL loan program. Before I begin my comments, though, I'd like to comment about the virtual format that we're having here today. And I certainly do not hold you responsible for this, but I think the Speaker should have the House of Representatives in session. We have an awful lot of important work to do, obviously relative to small businesses, but there are so many other issues that the country is facing right now. Congress ought to be together. We represent the American people in dealing with these various challenges that our nation has before us, and we ought to be here. Now, I happen to be in Washington right now. I'm in my office because I'm also on the Judiciary Committee, and we have a hearing going on as I speak with relative to the tragic killing of George Floyd and the aftermath of that. I was there this morning. After I give my opening statement, I actually have to go back there because I'll be asking questions shortly here. But again, I don't hold you responsible, Madam Chair. I think you've done a commendable, tremendous job. I prefer it if you were the ranking member rather than the chair, but we both exchanged those positions on occasion over the years, and I do think you do a great job. But Congress should be in session, and I can't emphasize that strongly enough. Relative to the EIDL loan program, it operates within the SBA's disaster loan program, and it was already up and running, as we know, long before the COVID-19 swept across the globe. It's important to note that the SBA's disaster loan program has had its trouble in the past, but it was consistently making improvements. Created by it was supposed to be a regional program that provided assistance to small businesses after a disaster. COVID-19 has presented numerous challenges to the program. The economic downturn caused by the coronavirus crisis, let's face it, has completely overwhelmed the EIDL program. As the crisis unfolded, the lines of communication from the SBA to businesses about the EIDL program, unfortunately, has deteriorated. Additionally, the total loan amount and the grant amount available within the program continue to be uncertain. These hurdles and roadblocks have impacted a small business ability to make important and critical decisions during these uncertain times. Thus far, the program has provided assistance to over 1 million small businesses all across the country to the tune of approximately $80 billion. In my home state of Ohio, for example, it's provided over 25,000 loans for a total of over $1.7 billion. Today, communication is slowly improving, but certainly more work needs to be done. And I commend you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing in order to assist us in getting that job done and getting a letter to the SBA that they just have to improve. We obviously sent a letter together in a bipartisan manner just recently urging the SBA that they have a lot of things they have to improve on. It's critically important that we have this discussion to understand how small businesses have fared during this crisis and how Congress can work to make improvements. Throughout this entire crisis, I've joined dozens of my House colleagues on conference calls and town hall meetings and a whole range of calls and conference calls with small businesses in their districts. Questions on the EIDL program were raised on a great many of these calls. And obviously, their principal interest was in the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, but the EIDL loan program is still there and dramatic improvement is needed. Congress has worked in a bipartisan manner to improve the Paycheck Protection Program. We must now work together to ensure that the EIDL program is operating efficiently and effectively for small businesses during this pandemic and following it. I look forward to discussing solutions and next steps with all of our witnesses today. It's important that we move forward with practical reforms that deliver for small businesses in my district, in your district, and districts all across the country. And Madam Chair, I mentioned that following my opening statement, I have to go back to the Floyd and judiciary hearing. So I will be heading over there. I'm not sure if I'll be back in time for the question part, but I want to thank you for holding this hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Shabbat. What I have news for you, you might have to wait a little longer.
Okay.
to go from ranking to chair. I would like to take a moment to explain how this hearing will proceed. Each witness will have 5 minutes to provide a statement, and each committee member will have 5 minutes for questions. Please ensure that your mic is on when you begin speaking and that you return to mute when finished. With that, I would like to thank our witnesses for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us. With us today, we have Ms. Nancy Sexton, the owner of the Muse Rooms, a co-working space in the Los Angeles area. After a career in the arts, she conceived her co-working business in August of 2015 and taught herself how to write a business plan to get started. In just 4 years, her business successfully grew into 2 locations right before COVID-19 struck. She applied for an EIDL, but encountered many of the challenges that have been reported with the program. Ms. Sexton, thank you for joining us today and for sharing your experience. I now would like to recognize the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Evans, to introduce our second witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I like the sound of that. Mr. Jerome Wack is a pharmacist and an owner of a Christian Street Pharmacy located in the diverse neighborhood of South Philadelphia. He has owned and operated the pharmacy since he graduated from pharmacy school 33 years ago. Mr. Wack is a lifelong resident of Philadelphia, where he attended 2 of my district's many excellent colleges, Temple University and the Community College of Philadelphia, my alma mater. I could not ask for a greater representative from my district to speak with the Small Business Committee on this important topic. I commend your commitment to serving and supporting the amazing citizens of Philadelphia, and thank you for participating in this hearing. I yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. And now I'd like to recognize Mr. Schneider of Illinois to introduce our third witness.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And it is my great pleasure to introduce my constituent, Dr. Craig Gerstein, and to thank him for sharing his perspective with us today. Dr. Gerstein lives in Highland Park and has practiced ophthalmology in the Chicago area for the past 20 years. He'll share that story a little bit in a moment. He runs the Gerstein Eye Institute jointly with his father, Melvin, who started the practice more than 50 years ago. Dr. Gerstein earned his medical degree from the Chicago Medical School. In addition to his practice, Dr. Gerstein also serves as an assistant professor of ophthalmology at Northwestern University Medical Center. I've known Greg for many years and appreciate him sharing his perspective as a small business owner, navigating both the complexities of this pandemic, but also the challenges he faced with his EIDL loan. Thank you for joining us today, Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. And now I would like to turn it over to Mr. Bishop to introduce our last witness.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Our next witness is Karen Kerrigan. Ms. Kerrigan is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, also known as the SBE Council. Ms. Kerrigan has multiple decades of advocating for small businesses and the entire small business ecosystem. With an expertise in startup funding and business growth, Ms. Kerrigan serves on numerous boards and coalitions. Ms. Kerrigan, welcome. And Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. And now I'd like to recognize Ms. Sexton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and the entire Committee on Small Business for asking me to come here today and share with you the challenges that I faced when applying and receiving the EIDL loan. And like she said, my name is Nancy Sexton and I own and operate the Muse Rooms. It's a co-working space in North Hollywood in California. I'm not from LA. I was born and raised in Ohio. I lived in New York for almost 12 years and I lived in Italy for 4. I've had a lot of great accomplishments in my life, but outside of marrying my husband, nothing has made me prouder than opening the Muse Rooms. Now, so you know, the Muse Rooms is a co-working space and we provide a workspace for entrepreneurs, creatives, and small businesses. We offer desk space, offices, and meeting rooms. The Muse Room started with my idea in August of 2015, and within 3 months, we opened. We were so successful that summer, we decided to open our second location in Burbank. And then we were able to go back and expand our first location. And within 4.5 years, we had expanded to 14,000 square feet with over 120 members. Then COVID hit. We shuttered our doors on March 17th prior to Mayor Garcetti's stay-at-home order. And now at this time, we suspended our billing because how can you charge somebody if they can't use your service? Then the SBA announced their loan, and then I worked with the LA SBDC network to get all my ducks in the row to apply because, there was a ton of paperwork that was required. On March 23rd, I started the EIDL loan process, and this is when I started uploading my documents. And over the course of the next 7 days, I was on hold for more than 25 hours, and I had uploaded my application, I had faxed it, I had emailed it, and each time I was told, oh, no, you're doing the wrong thing. Until finally on the 30th, I was told, you just got to go to this new portal. Super easy. It only takes 5 minutes. You don't even need documents. So I went to the new portal, and it was super easy. So easy, in fact, that I didn't even get an email confirmation that I had applied. Now, I was smart enough to write down my loan number so that when I called back, I had a point of reference. When I called, I was always told, look, these are the next steps. You're going to get an email to log into the portal. Then you're going to be able to talk to somebody. They're going to look at your documents, and they're going to tell you how much money you're going to get. And it should be 2.5 times your monthly bills. Now, remember, I'm not making any money, and my bills are stacking up. So on the 21st of April, I finally received my advance. It was only $1,000 because I don't have employees. Now, I was super psyched because my neighbor next door, now he had already gotten funded, and he had received more than what he thought. So over the next 10 days, I called several times wondering what was happening, because nothing was being communicated. No emails, no answers. And when you call, you get a different answer each time. Now on May 1st, my credit was pulled, and I got really excited. I got 2 landlords with their hands out. I have no income. I called, I get the same story. You're gonna get an email, you're gonna talk to somebody, you're gonna submit loan documents, don't worry. May 16th, I got that email. And when I logged in to see the amount that was being offered, it did not even cover 1 month of my expenses. So I called, and I was told by the woman on the phone, she read a statement to me for people who were calling in requesting more money than what was being offered. And she told me this, that in order for all businesses to get a little money, they were limiting the amounts distributed. And remember that this was when they were supposed to be giving up to 150K. I was taken aback. I was pretty upset. I had no one to talk to. I couldn't call anybody, and no one to plead my case to. So the SBA EIDL loan that I thought was going to save my business has now put me in a position that guarantees that I am going to have to close one of my locations. And I don't know how long that'll last. The stress of COVID was bad enough. Seriously, this SBA loan experience, the 58 days of not knowing anything. On top of COVID, this has been the most stressful period I have ever experienced, ever. It's been horrendous. Look, my entire business is built on customer service. Good communication is king. And let me tell you, without that, you are sending businesses into absolute chaos. And I thank you for my time.
Thank you, Ms. Sexton. Your time has expired, and now we recognize Mr. Wack for 5 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify before your committee today. And I do apologize for the problem I'm having with my camera. I'm very computer illiterate. My son set this up. And of course, today it's not working. Worked last night. We did a dry run. But I would just like to thank you and to just basically highlight the testimony that I wrote, and I hope you have in front of me. Very quickly, as Congressman Dwight Evans stated, I'm a longtime resident of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I came here very young as an infant with the Great Migration from the South. My folks were from South Carolina. They left after my father got out of the Navy after World War II. He came to Philadelphia. He wanted to have a better life for me and my other 7 brothers and sisters. I've been here at Christian Street Pharmacy since about 1987. And over the years, this area's changed tremendously. When I came down here, it was known for, the word was moral hazard. They wouldn't even give me insurance in the building because it was predominantly black and red line. Fast forwarding to 2020, it is about 90% white. It's been gentrified. I'm what I call landlocked. I have CVS 2 blocks away from me, Rite Aid 4 blocks away from me, Walgreen 2 blocks away from me, and I'm still in the process of holding on to the clients that I had prior to this. Pharmacy, unfortunately, is a very narrow profit margin business today with the competition that I just stated to you. It's very difficult normally with the very low rate of reimbursement. It's particularly hard with the copays. Many of the people that I serve are poor. They're part of the 25% of the people that the Pew Charitable Trust identified as being at or below the poverty level in Philadelphia. And yes, most of them look just like me and Dwight, Congressman Evans. So what we did characteristically to, and we have been doing is we have been giving free deliveries and we run what they call tabs. Folks who do not have the copays to cover their medicine, we fill it, and if they're able to access their funds the first of the month with Social Security or whatever insurances they have, they'll come and straighten their tab out. Well, in view of what's happened in the country with the COVID-19 crisis, many of these people are very financially strapped. They're unable to pay the copays, and for the most part, we've had to eat it. When I say eat it, we forego the copays and still continue to fill their prescriptions, and we're operating at a loss. The profit margin for an independent retail pharmacy in today's climate, according to the National Committee of Retail Pharmacists, is around 3 to 5%. So very, very narrow profit margin. And when you couple that with the loss of copays, the fact that the PBMs, pharmacy benefits managers like Medco, CVS Caremark, have for some reason slowed down, I don't know why, slowed down on the reimbursement. It's like being caught in a 3-way street. I mean, you can't get your copays, you're not being properly reimbursed. And on top of that, I was turned down for the SBA loan. So it's a matter of trying to stay afloat and navigate through these very difficult times. To give you a quick kind of summary of what I'm saying, a small pharmacy fills up to, say, 50 prescriptions a day. Medium pharmacy is between, say, 1 and 200 prescriptions a day. A high volume pharmacy would be filling greater than 200 prescriptions per day. So what that means is, let's make it simple. If you filled 50 prescriptions a day at the lowest copay, $2, potentially you could lose $100 a day. This is, over and above the other cash crunches that you're dealing with. So it's put me in a pretty hard position this way, not to mention the kinds of expenses that you need just to operate. A Philadelphia Electric Company, Philadelphia Gas Works, the water, Verizon, and the like. Can you hear me? I hope this is not going to be a problem.
We hear you. We hear you.
Is to let you know that it's been very difficult. I did go through the process to apply for the SBA loan, and I had great difficulties. It took me like a couple weeks roughly, And then they started to advertise that you could go to your local bank. They had some kind of portal or some kind of mechanism to go through the bank and apply for the loan. And finally, I did that one evening. I believe it was on the weekend. So basically, it's been a challenge, and I do ask the committee members if you would kindly look into the reason that SBA is utilizing a credit check to either deny or allow someone to receive an SBA loan. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
You're muted, Madam Chairman.
We heard you.
Dr. Gerstein, can you unmute?
Yes, I'm on mute.
Okay, please. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to speak today regarding my experience with the SBA in respect to the EIDL program. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Craig Gerstein. I'm an ophthalmologist who's been in private practice on the north side of Chicago for the past 20 years. The pandemic's enormous disruption of my practice required that I needed assistance in order to survive. It was at that time I listened to a webinar on small business resources hosted by Congressman Schneider. On that call, a representative of the SBA detailed the EIDL program and the application process. I spent most that evening locating the necessary forms, and the next day, on March 24th, I began the process to apply for the loan. Despite several crashes of the website and countless hours waiting on the SBA helpline, I was able to complete my application 13 hours later. Subsequently, I received an email from the SBA that my application had been received, and then another email saying that my application was under review. Throughout the following 3-week waiting period, I called the SBA helpline to ask questions, only to be told that my loan was pending, and that in 3 weeks, a loan officer would contact me regarding my approval and discuss the amount I needed and could borrow. 3 weeks from the date of my completed application, the status on my portal changed from pending to please reapply to complete your self-certification. After following the required instructions and submitting my application online, I was being told 3 weeks later to reapply. I completed the new self-certification form, hoping that it was an addendum, but then I received a new application number. I immediately called the SBA helpline, trying to figure out why I had 2 numbers. I was concerned that I was going to lose my position in line, as the loans were said to be a first come, first served basis. The helpline representative was unable to explain what had happened. I wrote a detailed email to the SBA customer service and never received an answer to my question. Instead, I received a response that directed me to 3 options: either connect to the website application page, call the helpline, or write another email. After weeks of waiting and uncertainty, the SBA could provide no answers and left me in a helpless position. I couldn't use the website, which had been removed. The help desk had no answers and could not address my concerns, and the email service offered nothing but an automatic reply. In desperation, I continued to send several emails, and I contacted Congressman Schneider's office for help in navigating this situation. While the Congressman's office attempted to get information from their SBA liaison, I once again called the helpline almost 4 weeks out. At that time, the SBA representative explained that the loan applications submitted prior to the newest version of the CARES Act were disregarded and that individuals needed to reapply. I finally received an email response from the Disaster Customer Service on April 25th that simply stated, you had to reapply because SBA developed a new streamlined application process, and those who applied before had to reapply. I received this notification as the SBA ran out of funds from its first round of applications and thus shut down their application process. I was left unknowing if my completed application that had once been quote unquote processed would ever be considered, and what having 2 applications meant for my position in line for the loan. Uncertainty kills small businesses, and this placed an extreme pressure on my practice. We do not have the luxury of time. Invoices, rent, utilities, health and malpractice insurance payments, and the salaries of my staff continue to accumulate, with no realization and how I would be able to cover those expenses. I needed the information and loan details that would have allowed me to decide to keep going or to close up shop. Decisions that needed to be made in real time with concrete answers. Unfortunately, hope doesn't pay the bills and put food on the table. Fortunately, after 6 weeks, I received an email notification that I was approved for a loan, yet I was not given the opportunity to discuss the amount distributed. I accepted the loan and sent an email with documentation to support a greater need for additional funds, but to this date, I have not received an answer from the SBA. I hope my experience highlights while the SBA and the CARES Act were designed to aid small business needs, the lack of infrastructure and transparency surrounding the SBA contribute to stress and that I and other business owners were experiencing during this economic uncertainty. The reality of the process in dealing with the SBA and specifically the EIDL program fell significantly short of what was promised through rhetoric and reassurances. I hope in the future there is more done by Congress to hold these loan programs accountable and to ensure that the SBA is able to properly allocate the needed funds and communicate to millions of small business owners during a time of great uncertainty. Thank you for allowing me the time to address this committee.
Thank you. And now we recognize Ms. Kerrigan for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Velazquez. It is really an honor to be here today, and let me thank you for your leadership of the committee and everything that you and the ranking member and all the committee members are doing to help small businesses during this very, very challenging period. We appreciated your early work in getting information out about what needed to be done to change the PPP program. Obviously, all of the members of the committee and you listened to small business owners, and we're just so pleased that the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act is now the law of the land. It's going to help a lot of small businesses, but we continue to work to make even more improvements because there is a lot more that needs to be done. As a membership organization with 100,000 members throughout the country and being around now for over 25 years, and when I listen to Craig and Nancy and Jerome, I'm hearing the members of the stories of my members as well. I mean, what they went through in terms of the program mirrors everything that our members have gone through. And as an organization, again, that has worked with the Small Business Administration, for the past 25 years on a lot of its programs, its education, training programs, special initiatives, we don't take any pleasure in pointing out the problems and challenges with the EIDL program. And all of us knew that the SBA had a heavy and unprecedented lift in launching this program. We at SBE Council and all the other small business advocacy organizations that we work with, we understood that there was going to be massive demand for capital in the small business community, but limited funds available, especially in that first tranche of money where the EIDL program really leaves a very, very, very small amount. And even given, many of the challenges, the execution and communication, our members and small businesses that eventually receive funds are grateful for this needed capital. But as you well know, there are many small businesses that got lost in the queue, that did not receive funds when they needed it or expected it. And of course, we're surprised by the dollar limit placed on the maximum loan amount and the per employee advance limitation. As I expressed in my written testimony, we believe that a fair amount of this angst experienced by small business owners, including our witnesses today, about the problems, the communication that was generated by the program, really could have been avoided through transparent and immediate communication about these changes. On paper, and as advanced by Congress in the CARES Act, the EIDL loans were ideally suited for many types of small businesses, Business owners and entrepreneurs were pleased to see a program pass Congress that would meet their immediate capital needs, provide some flexibility in using these funds, and would, as advertised, deliver this capital with speed. EIDL's breakdown, as communicated by our members, small business owners across the country, and of course our witnesses today, was and continues to be very sad to hear. Most small business owners were obviously shocked by the effects of COVID-19, and just the dramatic actions that happened afterwards, the plunge in demand and revenues, and they were desperate to identify sources of capital that could act as a bridge to their reopening. These areas of concern, as noted by our written testimony, included the lack of information about application status, hearing no communication from the SBA for long stretches of time, the shrinking advance based on employee numbers, the much smaller loan cap than advertised by the program and provided for by the CARES Act, confusion about how loan amounts were determined by the SBA, and then, of course, eventually them being shut out of the program due to the agricultural window that was established. So no doubt this crisis has been like none other, and unfortunately many small businesses needing help through the EIDL program experience these frustrations with the program when every minute of their time was valuable, focusing on productive work and activity that would carry them through the shutdown period and on to recovery.
Thank you, Ms. Kerrigan. Your time has now expired. I want to really thank all of the witnesses for everything that you have made here with us. And I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Gerstein, I understand that you were drawn to the EIDL or EIDL program by the 2 million maximum loan size, and that you were disappointed to learn of SBA $150,000 cap. I understand the unprecedented demand for the program forced SBA to make some difficult decisions, but they must still be operated according to the law. And so can you share with us how the smaller loan amount has affected your business?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I would tell you, the first issue is the complete uncertainty. Many of us didn't even know if we were going to get any money at all, and then we were counting on at least being able to communicate with someone what type of needs we had and how that loan was going to eventually help us. The $150,000 that I was granted was barely enough to cover my expenses for a month, and at this time, I am still not operating at 100, not even close to my normal pre-COVID level. In fact, for the last 2 months, we had been seeing maybe 15% of my normal patient volume, and we weren't operating until approximately about 3 weeks ago. So to not know what's happening, and then finally just to be given a certain amount of money with no answers, with no recourse to try to appeal, really kind of sets me as a small business. Now I have to explore other avenues. Now I'm starting from the beginning again, trying to look at different aspects of kind of that I can get capital in order to maintain my business.
Thank you, Dr. Gerstein. And Ms. Kerrigan, I agree with you that probably we might need to do more. We might have to do another relief package. We do not know if how this program has worked. We don't have any data. There is not explanation that have been provided to us as to decisions that were made, changing the loan size from 2 million to 150,000. Then, like Dr. Gerstein and Ms. Sexton explained, they were not able to get any answers, any information as to the status of their loan applications. So do you agree with me that as member of this committee, we cannot move to make any other changes or expand the program without the administration coming before the committee and provide the information that is required for members of Congress to do our job, and that is oversight, and that is to get to the bottom of what happened so that it might require to make some legislative changes.
Well, I agree totally. I mean, we need that information, that data from the SBA, and we need what went into the decision making in terms of going off course from what was actually in the CARES Act. And yes, I mean, in order to do your job, and it would be great if we had more money. It would be great if we could make those small businesses whole that didn't receive the $10,000 grant as they were promised, and perhaps more money can be provided for that. But I think taxpayers, the American public, want you to have as much information as possible, data, feedback, in order to know what is the path forward with this program. Absolutely is critical.
Thank you so much. Mr. Wack, would it be helpful for applicants if SBA clearly communicated its credit minimum so applicants would know exactly where they stand prior to applying for a disaster loan? Mr. Watt?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Okay. I think that would be a good first step because in addition to waiting like a couple weeks to be able to get on to the website, you're in such a state of anxiety, not even knowing if you're going to be approved. And when they did give me a response, that was also not that great. It took them like almost a month later to give me a response. And then it was kind of vague. I mean, unsatisfactory credit didn't really mean a lot to me. I mean, is 600 the cutoff? Is 400? I mean, what was it? And was there something I could have done, perhaps in filling out the application that would have maybe changed the way that they looked at the application?
Thank you, Mr. Wack. My time has now expired. Now I recognize Mr. Balderson for 5 minutes. Mr. Balderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, you cut out there, so I didn't hear my full name there. I apologize. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And my first question will be for Mrs. Kerrigan. Thank you for joining us today. My questions, as you and all of us here are too aware, this has been a devastating time period for our nation. Small businesses have been forced to severely reduce their operations, or in many instances, sadly, have had to close their doors. I've been in the constant communication with small business owners in my district around the many challenges they face during this time. And something these constituents routinely bring up is also something you highlighted in your testimony: access to capital now and in the near future. From the research done by the SBE Council and your own perspective, how have the federally funded programs benefited American small businesses?
They've benefited some. I mean, there's been a lot of small businesses who have not been able to benefit from these programs. I mean, if you look at the PPP program, for example, when it first started, it was those that were largely, connected to their banks and to their financial institutions. I think as more banks came online, community banks, credit unions, and even the addition, I think particularly of fintech, the big fintech companies, this made a big difference in getting this capital to a lot of those who didn't have sort of that commercial banking loan relationship, with their banks or with their financial institutions. So as the programs went on, both PPP and EIDL, they got better in terms of their communication and in terms of their funding. I think with the EIDL program, it's a different animal because, with PPP, you do have many players, the private sector that are involved, right, with the distribution of that capital, and more players involved. Whereas the EIDL, it's the SBA alone. And, it may be time that we begin to look at some type of PPP, private, public partnership, if we want to do something like this moving forward, because, it's apparent that the SBA didn't have the capacity, the technology, the artificial intelligence, all of that needed to do this very, very rapidly and quickly. And that's what small businesses needed, whether it was PPP or EIDL, was rapid access to capital. So, hopefully we won't have an event like this moving forward, but we might, and we've got to be prepared for it. But given that we do have technology, the innovation, I don't see why we can't do this more rapidly. And I think that's the big issue, is getting to this money to businesses rapidly and being able to communicate them so that they can make decisions about where they're going to be going in the, forward, and help them navigate, this recovery period.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentle lady from Iowa, Ms. Finkenawa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. It's good to see you and the folks on this committee and the folks who have joined us to share their perspective and help us do our jobs on oversight here. One thing that I have been focused on a lot during this pandemic is, we pass these bills, CARES Act getting signed into law, where these dollars go to these agencies. But at the end of the day, it's often up to these agencies of how they put these dollars out, what the rules and regulations are behind them. And it just underscores how important it is to do the oversight with these agencies and make sure that they're getting out to our community in the right way. So thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing today, helping us do this the right way. And we clearly, listening to testimony today, and then also hearing from my constituents throughout the 1st District in Iowa, have a lot of work to do when it comes to oversight with the Small Business Administration and how these programs have been rolled out and also how they're moving forward here. So Dr. Gerstein, I'd love to ask you a question. I chair the Rural Development, Agriculture, Trade, and Entrepreneurship subcommittee on the Small Business Committee. And something that our subcommittee heard about when we held a discussion a few weeks ago was from a woman, Melissa Moretz, a banker from my congressional district in Northeast Iowa, who's also a farmer. And she said that many business owners didn't have the information they needed to determine which Small Business Administration assistant program would work best for their business model. So how did you arrive at the decision to apply for the EIDL loan rather than the Paycheck Protection loan? And also, in hindsight, given that some of the challenge you faced in applying for your loan and your award being less than you needed, would you still have applied for the EIDL loan? And would you have applied for would you have applied for assistance at all, given what you know now? And I'll let you answer that part first, and I have a follow-up for you.
Sure. Having gone through the experience, I would not go through the experience ever again. It was traumatic. It was stressful. There was no communication. It took tons and tons of my time trying to educate myself and trying to figure out avenues to try to get answers. And I did apply for a PPP loan, and I very consciously did not go through the SBA simply because there was no communication with the SBA, and I didn't want to start going down that road again of trying to get something and not being able to talk to somebody, versus a bank where you can actually make a phone call and get an answer. To answer that part, the way I got the information was a town hall through Congressman Schneider's office. He kind of laid out certain different programming, and that was the loan that seemed to promise the most. And that was the loan initially. I was before the PPP was out and was passed. So and what really was terrifying to a small business, especially myself, was that constant reminder of this is going to be first come, first serve. So, you know, you knew, you could see the need was out there, and you knew that you needed to get things done in order to get in that line. And that's where a lot of my stress came, was because I was applying and I did everything right. And I hung in there just to get that application in, only to fall into the abyss.
I know we only have a few seconds left here, but what additional resources would have been helpful during that process from the Small Business Administration? And then also, now that you know what you know now, what would you hope they do moving forward here?
Well, the two things I can say, and I'm not expert on running the SBA in any regard, but I could tell you communication is paramount, especially with small businesses. We need to know where we are. We need to know when we can expect a decision to be made, and which I remember in the beginning, I was very upset that I couldn't request the amount I was asking for. There was nowhere on the form to even say this is what my need was. And that was very stressful. So the more transparency, and better infrastructure to deal with the small businesses is what's the SBA.
Gentle lady's time has expired.
Thank
Now
you.
we recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Hearn, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I know the ranking member had to leave for his other committee, and I really want to thank the witnesses for being here today during these certainly difficult times. I always like to start out this way, but as a small business owner for over 35 years, I certainly feel the pain of when we have these kind of disasters. And in 35 years, I've seen a few, obviously nothing as severe as what we're seeing now. And during these difficult times, we're going to have stresses on our system, and we've seen those. And as we all know, the SBA has done about 20 years worth of work in the last 12 weeks. So, you know, this oversight is good. It gives us an opportunity to test the stress of our system, but we also want to thank the great work that all of us have done in a bipartisan way in getting the PPP loans out and the EIDL programs out, because we all know that, you know, estimates are it's saved up to 50 million jobs in America. And, you know, we've got to be very concerned about what's getting ready to happen as we roll off of these loans. As some of you may know, you know, the EIDL program has done over, you know, several hundred thousands in loans, and you know, upwards of $80 billion in loan dollars. And in my state, it's about 7,200 loans and almost a half a billion dollars in loans. As we work, I think Administrator Carranza is working hard to try to figure out and listen. As the chairwoman mentioned, she's been in the Senate side listening to the Small Business Committee there. And I, too, would like for her to come back to our committee to hear what we have to say as well as we go through our fact finding. Ms. Kerrigan, you talk about some of these shortfalls in your testimony. And again, as a small business owner, I know that you cannot be successful by dwelling on past mistakes. We're here to learn and move forward. Can we talk about you know, solutions to these issues or on these mistakes, and what are some of the solutions that you think the SBA could implement moving forward to perfect the EIDL program and thereby helping more and more struggling small businesses?
Well, Congressman, you're absolutely right. I mean, this crisis was unprecedented, and you know, sort of the charge that was given to the SBA was unprecedented, right? And so we certainly understand that. And they've had their challenges over the years. They've had their successes over the years. I think the key one is communication. And I think, as you heard through the testimony today, and as we're hearing from our members, even if it's bad news, business owners want to hear it from the SBA in terms of we're not going to turn around your loan, or you're not going to get the capital in 3 days, as was promised, right? It's going to take longer. There's massive demand, and or you know, we ran out of money, or we're going to run out of money within a shortened period of time. So I think the more communication, you know, is better for small business owners, because then, as you know, as a business owner, you can make decisions based on that, right? So more information is better. You know, I think the other thing with all these programs, and including PPP, Congressman, is that, you know, as the law is passed by Congress, that is how it has to be implemented by the agencies. Obviously, they should be given some discretion on things like Congress gives them, you know, but if the law actually says $10,000, a $10,000 advance, or the max loan is $2 million. I mean, I think, the agency has to follow the will of Congress on this. And if the money runs out like that, then Congress can make the decision to fill the money again. But the other thing is also, and again, in a perfect world, all these programs would have rolled out at the same time, including the Main Street Lending Program, because they match certain businesses, they align with business needs, but that didn't happen. Okay. I think the other big piece is looking at this is what is the SBA, what is their capacity, and what are they capable of doing in this regard? And where do we need to call in the private sector and use financial technology, on a program like this?
Ms. Kerrigan, if I may, but I only get one question before we run out of time.
I'm sorry, I'm going on.
So, no, you're fine. We talk about the SBA. I think we know that a lot of government programs, standing at big programs, one size fits all is very difficult. Can you talk about and you alluded to a little bit a minute ago about what you think private industry could do to maybe facilitate, should we see this kind of occurrence again, what private industry could do alongside the federal government?
Well, I think you saw the power of that in the PPP program, where it was sort of like the traditional banking institutions and financial institutions that were initially a part of that. And it took a while for the Treasury to bring on fintech, right? But once they did, this money moved very quickly, and they're very small loans, $15,000, $20,000, to the types of businesses that maybe the banks weren't interfacing with, and serving. So I think they need to think forward. They need to think, be technology driven. And I think that's the same way with these programs as well, in terms of these public-private partnership, bringing, sort of the power of technology, and looking at financial, technology as a solution to all this. I really think it needs to be incorporated over at the SBA.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Now we recognize the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Golden, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You can hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Just want to make sure. Ms. Kerrigan, I wanted to ask a little bit more from you. I've been hearing from a lot of constituents in Bar Harbor and Auburn, Maine, who would like to use an economic injury disaster loan right now, but they've been shut out of the application process because they're not agricultural businesses. And I was wondering if any of your members have been finding themselves in a similar situation of late.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, they have. And, again, it's dispiriting. I mean, we have farmers and members of the agricultural sector, small businesses that are part of SBE Council. I think what the SBA wanted to do was to compensate, right, for them being shut out of the program earlier. But at the same time, you're shutting out, whole swaths, right, of the business sector, diverse businesses. And again, it goes back to the program should be open to everyone. If it runs out of money, once we know the data and once we know where we need to go, then, it can be refueled or refunded based on that. So yeah, that was sort of a little bit of the government picking winners and losers in the marketplace, although we love our farmers and our members who are farmers, for sure.
Yeah, certainly we do. You were talking a little bit about implementing the program the way that it is drafted in statute. And then, if the money runs out, you come in, you make that strong case with the backing of the business community for more funding, similar to what we saw with the Paycheck protection program, although they obviously took a little leeway in the rulemaking process there as well. But,
yes.
I had businesses like an independent trucker, tourism businesses in my district reach out frustrated with feeling like they had experienced a bait and switch when the EIDL was both downsized in regards to the amount that they could receive for those kind of more capital heavy businesses, but also when they were told that they were limited to $1,000 per employee on the grant size, because that was part of the original reason why they were so interested in going after EIDL instead of pursuing PPP in the early weeks, was knowing that grant was going to be out there, and they just wanted access to some revenue as quickly as possible. Ms. Sexton, I also wanted to just recognize your frustration with the repeated delays that you experience processing your EIDL application. I know in my office, we've heard from businesses all over the district um, who had a lot of similar experiences. And all of you have made the point about the importance of clear communication so that you can at least make informed decisions, which
Yeah.
is what I've been hearing and my staff have been hearing from businesses here in the state of Maine. Often it was the waiting many weeks, that was most disturbing because it delayed them from making other potential decisions and pursuing other means of surviving through this. It's not to say that these weren't important programs and that they haven't worked to help businesses, when they have worked smoothly. But I did want to acknowledge the frustration that you've all shared, and thank you for sharing it with us. I think the key point there is, as you all said, communication, not only between SBA and the committee in Congress, but also SBA and the ultimate client, which is the small business community. So thanks for taking part in this today and sharing those. I'm hoping that, I'm sure, I have no doubt that the SBA is listening to your testimony today, making note, and that they're going to be engaging with their clients, the business community, and the lenders out there for feedback, how they could improve these programs going forward. With that, I would yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. And now we recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Brochette, for 5 minutes.
Am I unmuted? Can y'all hear me? Okay, great. Hey, I've heard from everybody, and I appreciate everybody's our excellent testimony they've given. And I also wanted to welcome new member, Mr. Mafumi, to the committee. I look forward to, I've watched him from afar, and I'm looking forward to getting to know him. I would like also, I've heard what's gone wrong, and I've actually heard all those complaints from our constituents. And I'm wondering if each of y'all could briefly tell me what has gone right in what we've been trying to do. Maybe we can amplify some of that. And I'll yield to our folks.
Well, I'll just say, I'll start that, Congressman, and say, look, for the businesses, the small businesses that were able to access, the EIDL money, they're very grateful, for that support, for that capital. I think with the PPP program, it was really good to see the pivot, that was made on that in terms of making the modifications and changes that would make the program more flexible, practical, and relevant, for small businesses, particularly given, the extension of the shutdowns and what was happening on the ground. I mean, from our perspective, we would have loved those PPP changes to come more quickly, but look, they happened, and that's good. So you all were listening to small businesses, and you made those changes. And I think, that needs to happen over at the SBA too. But again, this was a whole big different program. And I do think now Congress needs to look forward and say, is this something that SBA should be doing as an entity, and do they have the capacity to do that? But look, for the businesses that got the money, and for the early intervention on the tax credits and all those other things, those are making a big difference for small business.
Any of the others?
Yeah, what I would say what was done right was that Congress definitely, and there was an emphasis on helping small business. It wasn't just helping individuals. It was really an attempt to help the small businesses out there that were no fault of their own, were shutting down or operating at very limited capacity. Unfortunately, what seemed like a great idea and the execution did not match. And the frustration was listening to the promises and being excited about the idea, and then the reality of not being able to access the funds or not get your questions answered. But the intent was there.
Yeah, and I could say that for me, what went right was unfortunately very little. What did go right was my ability to react very quickly when I saw that SBA had dropped the ball. We started a GoFundMe campaign, which actually, that's what saved me. The SBA money helps, sure. And I got a little bit of PPP, but I mean, I feel like giving PPP back because how am I supposed to pay that back? It's over 2 years. I mean, it puts a burden on me more than it's helping me. So, and look, I don't want to be complaining. I hear your question. What it did right was once I did get approved, my loan was delivered very quickly. That was right. But I'm sorry, they got so much wrong. I don't really, at this point, I'm so frustrated. What they got right is kind of irrelevant.
Thank you. Any others? Great. Chair Lady, thank you so much. Yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentle lady from California for 5 minutes. You need to unmute.
Thank you. Ms. Sexton, as a Congress member representing Los Angeles County, I thank you for sharing your experience as a Los Angeles business owner, a sole proprietor, and a former creative professional. It's clear from you and the other witnesses here today that SBA's administration of EIDL has been unacceptable at a time when small businesses need this relief more than ever. I also imagine that many of your clients are also self-employed individuals working in creative fields like the music industry. And like you, the sole proprietors, self-employed and independent contractors constitute a significant part of Southern California's economy, and they have been adversely impacted by the SBA's cap on EIDL emergency grants of $1,000 per employee. This cap is just not reflective of congressional intent and hurts individuals like you who, despite not having employees, have high overhead costs like thousands of square feet of leased property. So can you describe the impacts that SBA's cap on the emergency grant has on sole proprietors, self-employed and independent contractors like you and your clients, and give us some sense of the unique burdens that these type of workers are facing during the COVID-19 crisis? And also you described so many problems getting this emaciated loan. What would you do? What would be your top priority and things that need to be changed in the EIDL program?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman. Those are tricky questions in a little bit because there are so many, like, you know, out of my 120 members, we got like 60, 70 people who have their own businesses, right? And so right away, one of the things that I did was, because I had so much access to small business assistance, because I'm so heavily involved in the Chamber of Commerce and working with you know, a lot of different organizations, I was able to put a resource page together on my website to assist my membership. And a lot of the people were just frustrated. They would call me with the same frustrations that I was having, and then I would be calling my contacts, especially those from the LA SBDC, who were fantastic, by the way, and asking them to help me understand what was happening. But quite honestly, things change so fast in the law, or I mean, I'm not in the law, in the application process, that even the industry, even those organizations that were helping us try to understand what was happening, they couldn't keep up. And so what happened was, well, you would be getting an answer from somebody and have already heard that it changed, and then you just be frustrated going like, man, where are you? Why aren't you keeping up with this? Why is this burden on me? But my whole idea was like, look, if I can keep these people in their positions, and if I can keep them working and keep them getting money, then I can keep my business, right? I mean, because that's what I do. I provide a workspace for them. Their frustrations fall in the lines of just general stuff. I mean, lack of communication, not knowing what was happening. Some people weren't smart enough to write down that loan number and wondering what, and then they'd call people, and the operators were misinformed, giving bad direction to people on what next steps were. And then it falls on to, you know, look, it falls on to looking for other monies. And the PPP for me, because I don't have employees, is whatever, you know? I mean, you look at that and I'm super organized. I have everything ready and then I get nothing. And so I think the biggest thing, quite honestly, that the SBA could do is just communicate, be honest with people. I need to know what I have to do because, and I believe the other gentleman, Mr. Gerstein, said that like our bills are stacking up. We've got rents to pay. I mean, I can extend and sure, I can postpone payments, but that doesn't mean they're going away. So what am I supposed to do? You know? And so I really thought the idle loan, like I said before, I really thought it was going to save us. I really did. I mean, man, I was hoping on that. And now I'm like, if it wasn't for my GoFundMe, I'd be out of the game. I'd have to shut completely.
And I appreciate the fact that you talked about the SBDCs in such a positive way.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that if the SBA is overwhelmed in terms of being able to answer back to these loan applicants, why don't they deputize the SBDCs to inform people on the status of the loans?
I would agree that that would be an awesome idea.
Okay, the gentle lady's time has expired. Now we recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Spano, for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, I don't see him on the call any longer. I could be wrong.
We were just there. Okay, so now Dr. Joyce from Pennsylvania, you recognize. Mr. Bishop from North Carolina, now you recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I'll say I greet you today from our committee room, and it's wide open and empty. And I certainly invite others to join me here whenever you can. And I think to Mr. Wack in particular, it's been a bit of a disadvantage, and I apologize to you for the difficulty, sir, that you've encountered. It may be, if this is the only way that you could appear before the committee, then that would be better than not being able to appear. But I certainly wish that we'd been able to just have you come in and sit down and not struggle over things like that. I wanted to ask, and I guess trying to pick who, as I was listening to the conversation, it seems to me in order for this enterprise to be productive, that we probably need to get beyond frustration to diagnosis and make an accurate diagnosis of the problem. The obvious import of the hearing is to lay blame at the SBA. But I guess if Dr. Gerstein's still available, yeah, I see Dr. Gerstein, maybe I could ask you, and I'm sympathized because I've heard it many, many times, and I've actually experienced it myself. And when I first learned about what EIDL was going to be able to do, you've heard of the notion of putting out a fire with a garden hose, right?
Sure.
And so if you got something with it, put a 1 inch hose to put water through, and you've got a conflict, you got a big burning disastrous fire, you may not make much progress. Isn't it? And you mentioned the uncertainty, and a lot of witnesses have, and I find it to be difficult to deal with as well. But isn't it an inevitability of the nature of the problem that we have, this nationwide flatlining of the economy with the shutdown orders of the entire economy? Doesn't it seem to be that it's going to be hard to scale up a program that's designed for the a spotty tornado or hurricane to be able to operate nationwide?
I'm certainly not an expert in any regard. If you want to ask me about eyes, I'm more than happy to answer any question on that. But how to implement policy of Congress, I can't explain what the best thing. But what I can tell you is the idea of the SBA giving a little bit to everybody to try to quell the disaster is no different than coming into a room where 1,000 people are dehydrated and offering them all just little sips of water and hoping you're going to save somebody. It just didn't do enough to enough businesses.
Yeah, I got that point, and it's a good point. And I just wonder if in the sense of your frustration that you experienced as you were going through this, was it, did you either then, or do you, looking back at it now, think that perhaps it was just an impossibility to take SBA's EIDL, normal EIDL program and suddenly scale it up so it could handle that sort of task? Did that go through your mind at all?
Well, part of the, first come, first served basis that was emphasized showed me, and I knew that there was going to be a lot of demand. So, yeah, I knew there was going to be a lot of demand. I didn't know that the infrastructure in the SBA wasn't going to be able to handle in any regard. But yeah, I'm not surprised by that.
Ms. Kerrigan, and maybe if I follow it in the conversation I was just having with Dr. Gerstein, because you made reference to SBA sort of being able to scale up. You mentioned artificial intelligence. Is there some technical or technological solution that you believe exists that you could take a program like that it operated on the basis I suggested and suddenly and accurately and with efficiency scale it up to be able to handle a disaster like this and just expect the agency to be able to do that?
Well, like I said, I think both in my 5 minutes earlier on and also in my written testimony that we knew this was going to be a huge lift for SBA because one of the demand, right? We knew there's going to be a huge demand for this capital. And number two, sort of the limited capital that was available. And I think, a congressman, that the reason why we did the PPP program was to alleviate, right? Alleviate, right? So that was sort of the sister program, like, okay, let's get the financial institutions involved. But there were two different programs, Congressman. You've had one that was like and there was one was very restrictive, 8 weeks to use this money, as opposed to EIDL, which was 6 months. So
let me interject because I've just got about 30 seconds left, I think. I think your point's well taken, Ms. Kerrigan and Dr. Gerstein and the other witnesses. And I wish Mr. Wack was on. I think it'd be easier if I could see him. But I think that's really what we see is the PPP program being able to bring in the private sector to leverage the government is what made a relative success for PPP. And that was not without frustration either.
Exactly.
And so I think probably helpful to decipher what lessons we should be learning as opposed to just expressing frustration and leveling it all at the door of the SBA. Madam Chairman, of course, my time's expired. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. And let me just say, I welcome you for using the committee room. And I also want to thank the cleaning crew who will now have to go into the room and disinfect. I also want to recognize that many small firms are able to join us remotely to testify without undue costs for travel. And I'm glad we are able to facilitate a discussion without burdening small employers. So with that, let me recognize Mr. Evans from Pennsylvania to recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, again, as usual. When the pandemic hit, businesses across the country was devastated financially, especially African-American owned businesses, which declined 41% from February to April, the most of any racial group. As a comparison, white-owned businesses declined only 17%. Many Philadelphia small businesses have been struggling to make ends meet, which is why the Small Business Administration Economic Injury Disaster Loan is such a lifeline. Unfortunately, many of my constituents, including Mr. Wack, have been denied the EIDL loans because of unsatisfactory credit scores. Now, Mr. Wack, I'm gonna ask you 3 questions based on my time. And again, Mr. Wack, what was your reaction when you received your denied letter from SBA? Did SBA provide you and any further details on your denial, such as minimum credit score required? And in the CARES Act, Congress indicated that the SBA may use an application credit score or alternative methods to determine an applicant's ability to repay. Did SBA indicate that if any review your application use methods other than the credit score? Mr. Wack?
Can you hear me, Congressman?
Yes.
Part of what I've been long wait, but when I finally did a letter, there was no there was no other reason other than the unsatisfactory credit report, nor was there any way in that letter that I could have addressed that. I mean, how about if there was something in my credit history that I could have corrected or explained or whatever? It was just like something I thoroughly did not anticipate. And other than contacting your office, I really had no alternatives. I mean, what was I supposed to do?
So they didn't tell you in the CARES Act, Congress indicated the SBA may use an applicated credit score alternative method. They didn't say that to you, right?
I've never heard that. It wasn't stated, and I pay very close attention to the news, CNN, MSNBC, and other printed material. And I was following this to see that when I was going to apply, I had everything that I needed to do this properly. And I was just unprepared for this. That's the best way to put it to you. I had no notion that they were going to use your credit score as a basis for accepting or denying an applicant a loan.
Okay, so Mr. Wack, can you explain all the costs you are now paying yourself, including unreimbursement from pharmacy benefits, managers when patients cannot afford their prescription?
It's as I stated earlier, it's particularly bad because pharmacy is such a difficult field now in terms of the HMOs, in terms of you need an inventory, which means you go to a wholesaler. The wholesalers now are getting, they're ratcheting down. I mean, my competitors, CVS, Rite Aid, they don't have wholesalers. See, I go to a middle person to purchase prescription drugs. Rite Aid, CVS, they have their own warehouse. They go directly to Medco or SmithKline or whomever. They bypass this. And it's put me through a tremendous stress because now the wholesalers, when you fall behind in this industry, they put you on COD. Can you imagine trying to be COD with a one week's invoices could be like $16,000, $18,000, $20,000? That's particularly stressful. I have no real alternatives to deal with this. I mean, the wholesalers who supply us with the things we need to do our job are understanding, but it is a business after all. They're not going to continue to extend courtesy or forbearance for any great length of time. That's the other part of my anxiety. I don't know at what point someone's going to call and say, listen, this is it. You can't order anymore. What am I supposed to do then?
Okay, real quick, I need to, Ms. Saxton, you applied for the EIDL loan from SBA, but received much less than you requested. Did the SBA explain why you received a lesser amount?
Absolutely not. No explanations were given. You're literally just put in a position where you accept an amount and that's that. And yeah, it's a real it's a real problem.
I yield back, Madam Chairperson. I thank you, Madam Chairperson, for your leadership on small businesses and everything you've done. So wherever you want to meet, I'm going to be there.
Thank you. Thank you. And let me again call on Dr. Joyce from Pennsylvania. Is he on? Okay, so now we recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I want to thank the witnesses for sharing your perspectives and experiences. This is obviously a very difficult time for everyone, but for small businesses in particular, as the witnesses have highlighted so well today, the anxiety of trying to keep your doors open, trying to figure out how you're going to just make it through this, and to overlay that, as you have so eloquently shared, with the uncertainty, it was wonderful. As you have attested very well, the SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the EIDL program, is a vital lifeline for businesses in a crisis. It has been in the past, and it should have been that during this COVID pandemic. But it only works if the SBA gets the money out the door. The program can be useful for businesses in planning for long-term future in the midst of a crisis. And it's necessary and should have happened that we give these owners the information they need, like the status of their loan application, when they can get the money they're counting on, and allow them to make the difficult decisions if money is not going to be available. More than a month ago, I led a letter with Chairwoman Velasquez joined by 100 members of our of the House to the SBA, outlining our concerns with the EIDL program, calling for the SBA to create an application queue for new applicants and to provide the current applicants an update on their loan status. Unfortunately, these issues still remain unaddressed. Dr. Gerstein, I so appreciate you sharing your voice as a small business owner from our community here in Illinois. And I'm glad that small business webinars that I and my team organized help navigate the process and that our caseworkers could be a resource to you. But the detailed timeline you laid out, the long periods of no information from the SBA was not unique and was incredibly frustrating. I felt badly for what you were facing, and as you and I talked about, we saw it with so many other businesses around our district. I can't imagine what it was like living through this time as a business owner. As you said, and you said it very well, uncertainty kills businesses. Without updated information on loan status, contrary to being a resource, the EIDL program, the way it was administered became a hindrance towards achieving long-term planning because business owners just didn't know what they could rely upon. So if you would please, can you discuss two issues from your experience? As you were working through the process, you were also navigating the world of uncertainty that comes from operating a business during a pandemic. How did the lack of information hamper your ability to make the long-term plans for your business?
Well, it paralyzed us, quite frankly. I didn't know when going through this process, and with the initial description was 3 weeks, and then 5 to 7 days for that you would receive the income. And after 3 weeks and then 4 weeks, we just didn't know what to do, and or which, if I needed to look for capital elsewhere or not, would that have been a waste of time, you know? And then I was behind the line of all the people who went that different avenue. So it was quite paralyzing, and I was really kind of mired in with the SBA and just at their beck and call to see what was going to happen.
And Mr. Wack, Ms. Sexton, was your experience similar?
You hear me?
I can.
Okay. My experience was very similar, and I would best characterize it as traumatic. I mean, I've been on pins and needles trying to keep things afloat, keep going, and hoping that I would get an answer. And when I got the answer, well, it was no, but it was just so vague and such a strange response. I just wasn't ready for this.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I only have a minute left. So Ms. Sexton, just briefly, you laid it out very beautifully in your written testimony about how much stress this was. Is it still stressful?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, I'm literally I have to close my largest location, and that's going to take out 2/3 of my income. I mean, 2/3 of my business that I created after 4 years of, busting it, making that happen.
Yeah. And so Dr. Gerstein, the other thing we talked about is this arbitrary cap at $150,000. How has that impacted your planning for the future?
Well, at this point now, I'm looking at alternative aspects for capital. I did send a letter with documentation to the SBA. I'm still to this day waiting to hear from them and see if I'm going to be granted more income. But now I have to look at different programs through banks and other aspects in order to try to just keep us going until we get back to normal.
Got it. And my time has expired. What I would ask, Madam Chairwoman, as we proceed in this, one of the things I think we also have to explore is why did the SBA think it was prudent to not disclose information about changing policies? Why did they not give an alert that we were running behind? Yeah, it's the greatest frustration sitting at an airport is when they don't tell you why your plane's delayed. That's an inconvenience. Having loads delayed and these other things is devastating for these businesses.
That's why it's so important that we have them come before the committee, and we expect for them to comply with our request.
I look forward to that.
The time of the gentleman has expired, and now we are going to recognize Dr. Joyce from Pennsylvania. I believe he's on the phone. Dr. Joyce? well. So now we will recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me thank you for the great work, the life-saving work that you're doing as a committee leader. When I testified before the committee, as a member of the committee, I said that small businesses were mad as hell. And I was mad as hell. I'm sorry to report to you, Madam Chair, that they still mad as hell. Because the PPP program originally was a disaster. You did great work, Madam Chair, in carving out those $60 billion so that the money will go to CDFIs, credit unions, and local banks, which I think have a long-standing great relationship with small businesses. But we saw how the traditional banks favor their prestige customers, and some of them had to shamefully return the money back. And so this $60 billion that you allotted was very helpful. However, it's not enough. And of course, you know, now we see how this credit score business is being introduced. If you have A+ credit, if you can meet payroll, if you have liquidity and you have excess capital, the bank comes to you. You don't need to go to the bank. You go to the bank when your credit is hurting, when you're striving, when you're hurting to make payroll, you're squeezing by, when you have no money to expand and you have very little collateral, that's when you go to the bank. And so if the bank is shutting you out, then we're in trouble. Now, I know that we're going to need to do far more with small businesses, Madam Chair, and I know that your heart is in the right place. I work with Chef Kwame, who's an internationally acclaimed chef based in DC, but is originally from the Bronx, from Webster Avenue in the Bronx. He's won the James Beard Award, the most prestigious award for a chef. He's a young guy, I believe right under 30 years old. And he has an independent group association of restaurants. Restaurants, which in many cases define the character and the reputation and the personality of a neighborhood. We all go to a particular restaurant in Harlem, East Harlem, Washington Heights, in Red Hook, Madam Chair, your neighborhood, across the country, because they define those neighborhoods. They are hurting. And these businesses are marginal businesses that really work on a profit, you know, that's very tight to begin with. In fact, most of them just make their money at the bar. So I think that we're going to have to allot a specific amount of money to restaurants so that we can save them. And I think there are several businesses in areas of businesses where we're going to have to be laser focused to rescue. I think the Independent Restaurant Association, which has a great number of very good restaurants and that provide thousands of jobs to people from all over the country. We're going to need to really help out and allot some specific money to them so they'll be able to open. Most of them are going to open. They're going to do it on the sidewalk, outside cafe, in streets that are going to be converted to plaza. But no one is going to rush back to a crowded restaurant, so their income is going to be limited. And unfortunately, unless we help them, many of them will close, and as a result, we'll lose hundreds of thousands of jobs. So I want to thank Chef Kwame, who's a young rising star. He's right there at the wharf in Washington, D.C., Keith and Kin, you know, and so he's like a guy that's leading the movement for that business. And there are other businesses that I think face the same kind of challenges. So, Madam Chair, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and really do better for small businesses. And thank you for your work, and I yield back the remaining part of my time.
The gentleman yields back, and with that, we're coming to an end for this hearing. I want to take this opportunity to thank all the members for participating in such an important oversight hearing. And I want to thank all our witnesses for today, for their testimony and for offering the Main Street view of the SBA EIDL program. By sharing your experiences with us today, we will be able to conduct more effective oversight and continue to optimize the EIDL program. We have heard some rather troubling issues in your testimonies, and I assure you We will be following up with SBA on each one. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.